Spotlight with Shadow, a Canadian dad who's got his finger on the pulse of global entertainment and sports. Each episode features unfiltered conversations with everyday creatives, musicians, wrestlers, filmmakers, and more from every corner of the globe. No fluff, just raw, real stories. This is Spotlight with Shadow, presented by Off the Top Media.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Spotlight with Shadow. I am your host, Shadow. Tonight, I am joined by a musician, a new friend of mine. His name is Yusuf. How is it going, my guy?
Dude, I'm good. How are you doing, bro?
I'm living the dream. You know, it's kind of cold and the weather's changing up here now, right? So,
oh yeah,
without notice, which sucks, but
right. I mean, like, to be fair, the whole randomly it's like 20 degrees in southern Ontario in November is like, it's kind of nice, a little concerning, but then it dips down to like 8 and you're like, I hate this.
Right. It sucks.
Yeah.
So I don't do all the pleasantry stuff because everybody does that. So I'm going to dive right in. Tell me a little bit about yourself when you were a youngster.
When I was a youngster? Oh man, I mean, like, am I still considered a youngster?
I'm talking
under
like
the age of 30, you know, like,
I'm under the age of 13. Let's go with that.
I don't know. I mean, like, you know, like, born and raised here in good old Richmond Hill, Ontario. Grew up to, you know, with immigrant parents and everything, so life's a little different in that way. But you know, just grew up doing the things that most kids like doing: watch TV, go outside, play games, do all that. Like, I got a younger sister, so her and I would do that, read books, shit like that. And around like when I was younger is when I started getting really into like sports and like my profession as a musician. So like, you know, watching hockey, pro wrestling, as you know, obviously, like, obviously getting into that, like, what the old joke that 12, 13 is kind of that prime age where like every kid gets exposed to wrestling at some point around that time, and then it's whether or not you keep watching it as the thing. And for me, it's been I've just been following since then. It's been 15, 16 years now. So yeah, that was like youngster Yusuf, like very excited about all these things and like see this all on TV, and then, you know, fast forward and I'm just going to shows all the time.
Fair. I mean, I met you at a show thanks to our mutual friend Phil, who is a former guest on this show as well.
He is he is the.
I mean, I got to meet some cool people that weekend. Yourself and I feel like his name's Tyler, right?
Tyler, yeah. My co-host at Vacant Wrestling.
The American All Ego.
Yes, he is. It's so funny with him because I paid zero attention. As much as I respect the hell out of Ethan Page, I paid like zero attention to him when he got to NXT, but I was kind of excited that he was there. And then when I saw a photo of him, and I'm like, oh my God, you two do look alike. The funny thing is, Tyler has an older brother who, if you put him and Ethan Page side by side, you couldn't tell who's who. I'm serious. Like, Tyler kind of looks like Ethan Page. His older brother pretty much is Ethan Page. It's the funniest thing, but yeah.
I love that. I mean, in July, we spent a good portion of 3 days together.
Yeah.
We were lucky enough to watch Money in the Bank on the floor, thanks to our friend Kyle.
Our boy Kyle. Oh man, that dude. So I'm in my house right now, but I have a studio that I have all my gear in, and I have like a wall for all sports memorabilia that I've collected over the years, wrestling memorabilia, just anything I've gotten from shows or gigs I've done. And I've still got the ticket stub from that night, and every time I look at it, I'm like, it's surreal to think that we got on the floor for Money in the Bank.
Right, and not just the floor, like we were right along the aisle, like a couple rows.
Yeah, it was nice. It was nice, actually.
It was a hell of an experience. I still had, up until recently, it was in the back of my phone, and then I was like, I don't want it to get ruined because I move my phone around a lot in the sunlight, so I ended up putting it in my mini briefcase that I got at the event, just to mark the occasion. So you grew up a wrestling fan. Like, what era would you say you started watching it? Because we're not much age difference, but you a few years younger than I.
Yeah, not too much younger. So I was exposed to wrestling when I was maybe like, I don't know, I think 8 at first. My grandfather was a big wrestling fan at the time. So that was just at the end of the Attitude Era, like the tail end of the Attitude Era, and kind of getting into the Ruthless Aggression Era. But I didn't start watching then. I would just see it on TV whenever I would like visit my grandparents. When I started watching, I want to say it was probably into, I think, the back half of the Ruthless Aggression Era. I want to say 2003, 2004. Like, my first actual memory of watching a wrestling show was the Raw after the Royal Rumble in 2004 when Benoit had won the Rumble. And so I kind of started from there, got off it for about not too long because I wasn't trying to like watch. I didn't have time to watch weekly. But yeah, around there is definitely when I started really getting into professional wrestling. And then 2000, I want to say 2007, 2008 was where it really started to pick up, like just around the time of WrestleMania 24. So
now, like a bunch of us wrestling fans, there is that elusive time where we all just said, no, we're moving away. It's happened to a bunch of us. And for me, it was between 10, beginning of 11 to about just when Bray Wyatt debuted on the main roster. What about you? Were you in that lull period of people as well?
Oh, it was on and off for me for a while. Partly because when I was in high school, I was doing like all these different orchestras and whatnot. So my rehearsal times would be Monday nights or during times where like pay-per-views were happening. So I wasn't able to catch up on the product as much. But when I really stopped, like when I realized, okay, the product's not great right now, I kind of need to get away from this. Probably, I want to say 2011, like Mania 27 time around there. Because I think what kept me going in 2010 was the Shawn Michaels Undertaker rematch. That kept me going through the first half of 2010, going into Mania 26. And I thought, okay, this is still good. Everything else is fine. Because I think that was the same Mania that Batista and Cena had their match for the WWE title, if I'm not mistaken. A couple other not in, whatever's here and there. I'm pretty sure Jack Swagger oh no, who was it? I can't remember. It was Jack Swagger retaining the World Heavyweight title against, I believe it was Edge, and then got cashed in on like a few days later. Some ridiculous thing. Like, no, Swagger cashed in. That's what it was. Jericho beat Edge for the world title, retained it, and then got cashed in on by Jack Swagger later that week. That was what it was. Anyway, so I don't get flamed by wrestling fans. I do remember my stuff. But that 2011 period to about probably 2012, late 2012 is when I just stopped watching wrestling for a while because I was like, okay, this is boring. I'm getting tired of this. Like, this is not worth me staying up, this late to keep up with what's going on because the product just sucked back then,
It was hard. It was really hard.
It was really difficult to keep up. So,
I mean, realistically, right now, unless I'm actually attending a show like Money in the Bank when we did in July, I'm having a hard time just even keeping up with the main product. It's not that it's bad. I'm just really loving the indie scene right now.
Dude, you know what? Like, I gotta say, what's going on in the indies is it's nice because the indie scene doesn't have as much of a mainstream presence as it did like 5-6 years ago, like before the pandemic. You know what I mean? Because like Ring of Honor was definitely leading that charge of like the big indies going around. And then like Progress, Rev Pro, companies like that.
You can almost consider TNA as well in the indies a little bit. They kind of fall off.
TNA in that time definitely was kind of considered an indie because, what a crazy fall off that company had, huh? Like just up and downs for almost 2 decades. But around that time, you could consider that. But I trying to keep up with the product even now. I'm not following the indies as much. But it has to do with whether or not the product keeps you captivated, right? And I'm a big fan of seeing that the show is consistent on a weekly basis, not just with like one specific feud or one specific storyline, but with the whole show. Like there's a flow going, right? Like I'm a big fan of making of seeing that Monday Night Raw. This week, there's a good flow going on throughout the whole show. Hopefully next week, same thing, right? And I know it's kind of dimmed when Raw's gone back to 2 hours for the next little while. That's until Netflix era begins in January. But, it definitely is hard sometimes because I'll try to keep up because, with the wrestling podcast I work with Vacant Wrestling, we'll always try to keep up with like the major storylines. And there are some days where I'm like, oh, this bores the hell out of me. Like, I'll be honest. Now it's gotten better, but all the stuff with like Final Testament, Karrion Kross, and all that, I love Karrion Kross to death. I think he's underrated as one of the best promo guys in the company when he takes him, and he always takes himself seriously, right? But when he like is really into it, he's one of the best storytellers in the company in WWE. But the whole Final Testament thing has just been so boring to me. And I'm like, can this be more interesting? Because then I really don't want to watch Raw. Because then I'm only watching Raw for like one or two things, and then that's it. And I'm like, I'd rather be able to watch the whole show. But now it's been picking up with the whole Wyatt feud, which has been great. But you know what I mean? Like, when the product is consistent, it's worth keeping up with.
Yeah.
But then sometimes there's those little hiccups where you're like, I can skip a week. And then that becomes 2 weeks.
There's definitely been times in the main roster of sense where the continuity isn't there, and it's really irritating because it's like they start something and then it just kind of goes away, and then it's back and it's there. And it's like the only one I'm okay with doing that is the Wyatt Six, because they're not supposed to be a continuity thing. They're supposed to be a here and there presence, right? They're not.
Right, exactly. And they're doing that very well with the Wyatt Six.
They are.
They don't have to do that every week. Just let them do something major for a bit. When that's over, they disappear, and when they need to come back and be spooky again, they can come back and be spooky.
You had said it that you're a big fan of Karrion Kross. I still refer to him as Killer Kross. So I know you, like me, you listen to a lot of CVB. And I don't know if you got his episode with Karrion Kross.
The most recent one?
Yeah.
I did, yeah.
Okay. I don't know if you counted. I lost count at some point, but the amount of times that Kross said he was going to throw people down the stairs was just great.
I did not realize how many times he had said it, and then all I saw after that episode came out was just memes of people being like, "Oh, I'm going to throw you downstairs," and I'm like, "Why are people bringing this up all of a sudden after this episode?" And then I realized, oh, because he just threatens people with throwing them downstairs. Interesting, got it. Killer Kross is such a interesting dude to me. Because coming out of his time in Impact, wasn't it? Before he went to WWE? Was he in Impact? Was it Impact? I can't remember where he was before that.
I think it was Impact.
I know it wasn't Ring of Honor. Yeah. So coming out of before he got to NXT, I knew him as a pretty solid wrestler, not as a person, just as a wrestler. And I'm like, okay, I'm excited when he gets here. Comes to NXT, has his, I will destroy everything shtick in NXT, holds the NXT title, does all that. Coming to the main roster, we don't talk about the first time he came to the main roster, but afterwards,
his sex dungeon gig.
Yeah, the sex dungeon get up. Getting to understand him as a person is so great, and seeing all the interviews he does, because you really appreciate how much he loves what he does, and he understands that some of it might be looked at as ridiculous. And it looks like, what are you doing with your career, dude? Really, like, you're doing this and this and this. But the fact that he finds pride in it, the fact that he takes it so seriously, the fact that he's able to find joy in these things, it's like the hell of a amount of respect for the guy.
Yeah. Fact check. Thanks to Scowls. He was Impact before. He was Killer Kross.
Yeah. Okay. I figured. Okay. Because I don't remember him in Ring of Honor. Yeah. Oh yeah. Gotta make sure.
Yeah. Exactly. As of recording this is November 13th. I believe we're still on the 13th, or is it the 14th now?
It's the 13th at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. This is why I'm bringing it up and noting the date. We have War Games coming up in Canada, in Vancouver.
Yes, we do.
Now, you spoke about the Kross and the Wyatt Six. I think, respectfully to the women's division, they don't need a War Games match. That should be a War Games match.
I would love for that to be a War
Games. The brutality in that match alone would be amazing.
Oh, yeah. Well, here's the thing, right? I get, if there's a men's match for it, they have to have a women's match. There isn't.
They don't have to, but I'm sure the population would be pretty.
Yeah, right. And plus, the thing is when you look at what's going on in the women's division right now, is there a reason? Is there like a catalyst of some kind to have a women's War Game match? Not really, unless it's like Nia Jax versus someone.
I think if you can make the argument that if there is going to be a women's, you need to call up the 10 women you just had scrap it out on.
100%. Oh my god. Yeah, that would be the obvious choice. Plus, like, it doesn't help that both your women's champions are heels.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like you can't you do that. Because like with the men, we all knew that was coming. That was the most obvious thing.
I mean, we knew about that back at WrestleMania. That was going to be
exactly. We knew this was going to come, right? To your point though, I would have loved to see a War Games match between, Final Testament and the Wyatt Six, mainly because the Wyatt Six don't wrestle spooky. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of things I do love about that faction. But the one thing I truly appreciate and that I love that, Triple H booking has made sure with them is that there's no supernatural
element.
There's no supernatural element or gimmick to them. They are all still the same people they were, but they've been taken in by this creature, if you will, of Uncle Howdy, and they're still the same wrestlers, but there's a little more aggression to all of them. And that aggression really helps fans understand and remember these guys are really good in the ring. Like, the 6-man tag that they had against American Made, where it was Loomis, Gacy, and Rowan. People forget how good Joe Gacy actually is in the ring.
People forget Loomis can actually
wrestle, and he's not just that silent serial killer gimmick. And even with that, like, he could still wrestle when he was in Impact with Samuel Shaw, but it's crazy to think that people forgot because they were gone for quite a amount of time. But coming back as the Wyatt Six, like, we actually just talked about this recently on Vacant Wrestling on our podcast, that they're not being referred to as Mercy the Buzzard. They're not being referred to as Huskus the Big Boy. They're not being referred to as those Firefly Funhouse characters. They are being referred to as themselves. And what we are seeing in the ring is them. Right. So a War Games match with that would be so much fun.
It would be
like just violent, just dangerous and violent.
Maybe it's just selfish of me that hopefully we could just hold it off for a couple months and it shows up in Elimination Chamber Toronto.
Oh yeah, that'd be exactly. Hopefully.
We'll just brush it down the road a little bit. It'll just disappear, but that won't happen.
Yeah, within if
that's
only
too much time in between for that not to.
Yeah, exactly.
Boil over at that point.
Yeah.
So what? My next question. We'll revert from wrestling back to what you do for a living here. How do you get into this gig of life of just being a musician? I mean, musician is kind of like indie wrestling in a sense, isn't it? It's a starving art.
Kind of, yeah. Well, so the bright side is I work a corporate job as well, so I'm able to fund all that, and which is nice. But it's interesting. So I was explaining this to someone recently. So besides being a performer, I also teach as well. I'd gone to school 2 different times for it. So I have a master's degree and everything, and I teach mainly out here in Richmond Hill, but I also teach at a couple colleges out in the Toronto area. How this all started was, a lot of people my age, their dads probably listened to like a lot of classic rock and whatnot, because that was like the thing in their time. So I grew up listening to like Queen, Zeppelin, Prince was like one of my favorite people, Bowie, like all that growing up. And I really started to like listening to music then. And then my dad got me a guitar, and I got like kind of super not into it, but yeah, just like playing and trying to learn things, because it was like, oh, this seems challenging. Okay. That's been my whole thing too in life, is like, other people, when they find something challenging, they're like, okay, I will find my way to that point. Like I'll practice, or like I'll work on skills to develop them, and then eventually get to that. Whereas my ideology is, fuck that. I'm just going to learn that and learn from that and just go from there. And so, like it was just kind of a hobby at first. And then it's funny. I was in high school. It's 2010, I think it was. Yeah. I was doing the music art program in grade 9, and it's all like orchestra there, so it's not a lot of like rock and roll kind of shit, which is fine. Like I kind of wanted that discipline of being an orchestra kid. But what really set me over and made me take this seriously was a friend of mine in high school introduced me to possibly one of the greatest metal bands to have ever come out of our country of Canada, Protest the Hero from Whitby, Ontario. And it was the record Fortress. And the first time I had heard that in my life, I go, how I need to do that. That is sick. What the hell is going on? And that was kind of where it started. Like I just disciplined myself outside of school. I would come home and practice like 3 hours a day, every day for years. And then eventually went to college for music. I would start taking gigs here and there. And then fast forward, I don't know, it's been like 10, 14, however long years later. It's mainly teaching now, but yeah, that's kind of where it all started, was just having a fun little interest in it at first, and then hearing this crazy band from Whitby and being like, how do I do that? You know?
Fair.
Yeah.
I mean, our mutual friend Phil credits you with a little bit of lessons towards him as well in the drumming he's done.
Yeah. No, you know what? The one thing I love about Phil, he's got such a great attitude when it comes to that kind of stuff, because I pride myself with being able to teach drummers that are already very good. And Phil's a great drummer. I love watching him play. I love listening to him too. And I've been badgering him occasionally here and there. I'm like, you should come over for a lesson. And he goes, okay, what do you want to work on? I'm like, I don't know. What do you want to work on? Right. Because for me, my the way I was kind of taught when I was going through college, and then when I was doing my master's degree, is I try to break everything down fundamentally as a teacher and just start from bare bones. So even if someone has been playing for like 10, 15 years, cool, great. So have I. We're going to just break it down, because I do that every few years now, where I'll just break down everything and start basically from zero, despite having been doing this for so long. And so being able to teach Phil was fun, because he's so keen about learning new things, and even just things that he already knows, but you've never really thought about. That's another big philosophy of mine in teaching, is really helping people unlock that part of their brain where you know what the concept is already, but we're going to think about it a different way to really help you change a lot of things. So, yeah.
I take that approach with interviews. Like you kind of figure okay, we're going to sit down, we're going to talk. But
right.
I don't ever give you preempted questions. I only ask you a couple questions beforehand to ask what you want to talk about, what you don't want to talk about.
Right, exactly.
I kind of ask for a little bit of your information about you. But I don't lead you on to any questions I'm going to ask, because that's not the way I like to run things, because I like the genuine conversation. Like we were at the bar. That's the kind of conversation I want to have. I don't want to have well, yes, I did drumming for 10 years. Like,
yeah, right. That's the thing. No, it's the same thing when I teach. Like I have, it's always fun, because my students range in age from like, the youngest student I have right now is in grade 11, and the oldest student I have is Phil. So it's fun when some students of mine, and I briefly taught at the University of Toronto for a little bit, but my students will always ask me, why don't you ever come in with like a proper lesson plan? And I go, we just do this on the fly. I know what I want you to work on. I want you to figure out what you need to work on, and I'd rather do that by conversation. So even recently I was doing a lesson with a student, and I had him go through this warm-up that I always do. So as we were going through it, halfway through, while he's still playing, I just asked him, hey, how's your shoulder feeling? And he goes, what? I go, how's your shoulder feeling? And he goes, oh, it's actually really tense now that you think about it. I go, great, let's talk about that. So stop playing and let's go from there. So we started talking about posture and whatnot and things like that to help your playing out. I told him, go work on that, go, figure that out at home, and then either text me or come back to me next week and do that. And like 4 days later, 5 days later, he gets back to me. He goes, oh, I feel like so much better, like sitting upright, or like just changing the way his body was positioned. Right. And I'm like, right, this is why I don't do lesson plans, is because I don't come into a lesson, or like whenever I'm teaching, wherever I'm teaching, being like, hey, here's what we're going to do. I sort of give a rough, not a guideline, but just rough ideas of what I want to talk about.
Right.
And then from there, how the students react to it, we just jump on that. It's just a constant sort of flow of ideas and moving around things.
Right. Like you said, like I guess the easiest way I could compare it to, I'm a sports guy. So are you. But this would make sense to you. In hockey practice, your coach isn't going to wait till the next practice to tell you what you're doing wrong.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Want to work. If they're a proper coach, they're going to tell you what you're doing wrong right then, even in game. They don't want to wait till practice. They got to break it down right then and figure it out. So with the drumming there, we're going to get to hockey and stuff in a second.
Oh, yeah.
With the drumming there, and you're noticing something with the shoulder, that's breaking it down, stopping it right there. So that way he's paying attention. Okay.
Exactly.
Wrong.
No, the same thing, like a lot of it stems from how I was taught, because my private teacher, when I was in college, through all 4 years of my bachelor's degree, that's kind of how he would handle things. Like he'd have a lesson plan, but when we would go through an hour-long lesson, and like halfway through it, he'd be like, hey, your foot's looking a little off. And I go, what, really? And then it forced me to pay attention. I did rugby for a few years, and like my coaches were the same way, right? Like, oh, hey, I feel like I'm not getting enough speed, or, I feel like I could do something a little better, like off the scrim. And during practices, he just grab me by the shoulder and be like, okay, think about it like this, think about it like this. Don't like lean into the ball, think of it just different, something completely different for an approach. And I was like, okay, because it's not a, hey, go home and think about this. It's a, now we gotta go now. Yeah, come on. You can think about it after the fact. Right. So
yeah. I mean, it's a lot of things in life, and I think a lot of people should take
exactly.
a lot of things in life. We end up with, we're not going to talk about it. Anyway, exactly. Now, me and you were talking a little bit. You're a huge advocate when it comes to youth in general, whether it be sports or music. So how do you get involved with the youth around other than like your students? Like what drove you to be community oriented?
So part of it was, so with my upbringing, my dad's very community oriented in different ways. So he's a franchisee with Tim Hortons, and so he's been big on community. He's out in Scarborough, so he's been big on community out there for a long time. He runs and donates to like a ton of orphanages back in his home country in Bangladesh and whatnot, right? And I wanted to be able to do things like that, but on a smaller scale, because I just don't have that kind of money yet, right? But I want to be able to help in different ways. Never mind just like donating to a cause, but finding my way to really help others. So with music education, because that's been my whole thing, growing up since I was a kid, fast forward to now as a teacher, I working with youth orchestras or small bands that are trying to like get themselves out there. For me, it's big on making sure they're on the right path and really giving a lot of people just a sense of guidance. And I never ask for money for these things, right? Like I'm not asking people to pay me to do it. Yeah, like I'm not asking people to pay me for this, right? It's more so I just want to help people out because I was self-taught growing up until I got to college. I never really had that help growing up besides like high school. So I want to make sure that, kids growing up now, especially with music, are doing that. And with sports, it's interesting because even though like I didn't play hockey growing up, I just fucking really love the sport of hockey. Growing up, it was always, it's great to see like back then, like I'm a Red Wings fan, right? So for me growing up back then,
it was about that, but I'll let you continue.
Yeah, don't hush you. So oh, I know, I figure. So growing up seeing like Pavel Datsyuk, Brendan Shanahan, Steve Yzerman, Nick Lidstrom, all those guys, it's all white dudes. Right. I didn't grow up getting to see a lot of, tanned or brown skinned players playing hockey until Nazem Kadri. And with Nas, I remember after he got drafted, I was like, I really wish there were more players like Nas. And he has an interesting story in my life. I've never met him. I really want to one day. But when he had won the Stanley Cup with Colorado a couple of years ago, I found out from a friend that he was bringing the cup to London. And he was going to bring it to the mosque that he had grown up around. Because Nazem is a very devout Muslim, very devout in the faith. And my dad, being a very religious guy, and I'm not too religious, but I do acknowledge and respect the traditions of Islam. I told my dad, I'm like, we should go. I don't know why I'm feeling this way, but I feel like we should take the 2-hour trip to London. It's not the worst thing in the world. So we went. They had a whole prayer service in the morning, and they were talking about Nas and his faith and everything, and what he's been doing for minority communities for hockey, much like what he had growing up, going through AAA and then going through junior and whatnot. And I was like, I want to really, be part of that. As someone that didn't grow up playing hockey, I do want to see a world one day where we see not a majority, but a lot more.
Fairly representative.
Yeah, fairly representative in the NHL, right? Like, I was talking about how I was chatting with a friend from TSN actually that day at Nazem's cup ceremony. But Nazem Kadri is the highest drafted brown Muslim player in NHL history. The highest drafted Muslim player is Nail Yakupov, but he's Russian. And he was like white passing Russian, right? And I'm like, one day I want to see a day where we have a brown, born to Middle Eastern or South Indian immigrant parents player that's born in Canada that gets drafted, top 5 or even top 3, hell, even first overall, right? Like we saw that with Quentin Byfield a few years ago. He is currently because no one's been picked first overall that's African American or of any kind. Being picked second overall, he's the highest drafted African American player in NHL history, right? just to see that representation in such, it's so small right now, but I really feel like we're getting to a point where it's going to grow and grow. And I was working with a youth hockey organization based out in Scarborough called Seaside Hockey, which is a great young organization. They've been around 30 years, but they're a great group of guys.
Oh yeah, my camera is being.
Yeah, I know. But they're a great group of guys, and I love chatting with them and working with them. But a lot of their focus is very dedicated towards representation and just hockey in general. And so for me, it's like it's not so much a pride thing. It's more, I would love to see more people like me in these sports to truly show, especially in Canada, because I feel like it'll truly show the diversity of this country.
Yeah, I mean, we're heading in the right direction. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to say that I'm versed in this subject. I don't claim to know as much as I should. But like we had the upstarting with the Punjabi night in Canada. I feel like I'm saying that wrong, but that's a positive step for the Muslim community.
Oh, it's huge. Well, different religion, but I think just for representation of, for lack of a better word, brown people in hockey, it was perfect. And I love, Harner Ryan Singh being able to upstart that, being a fan of the Vancouver Canucks growing up, and being able to turn it into his own hockey night in Canada for the Indian community it's the coolest thing in the world.
I think my favorite call, 2017, maybe 2016, Nick Bonino. The Nick Bonino call. Bonino. Like,
yeah.
That was such a cool moment. Like, me, I in a sense, I feel what you're talking about with the community, in your community, not being represented well. My children being half Native, half Asian. Mm-hmm. There's not a lot of Native or Asian hockey players. Right. Unless you go to China, but I mean, that's different. That's over there.
Well, even then, yeah. So
there's very few in that. So I sympathize or empathize. I don't remember which one of those two.
Well,
with you in that sense, because my children are kind of going through that themselves, where they look around, especially right now, they're in minor hockey. They look around and there's more white children around them than their own culture.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing too is, part of why I really try to get involved with these kinds of things now is because I want, younger athletes and even musicians to be able to have those opportunities without their parents worrying too much about money. Because this as a hockey parent, and I've known this as like a sports guy, dude, hockey's expensive. Oh my God.
Here's a fun story for you. Again, this episode is being filmed November 14th. My oldest son, he broke his a piece in his hand 7 days ago. Mm-hmm. He hadn't even begun technically his hockey season yet, because he was still practicing for the last month and a half. Games were to set that weekend. The weekend he broke the piece in his hand. And now he's losing half his season because of some stupidity he decided to do. That's $350 out of my pocket. That's not going to playing right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's not.
Yeah, that, I mean, things like that, things like and even with hockey, like how much it is for sticks, your gloves, pants, all that.
Yeah, I'm not gonna get into that conversation.
Exactly. That's a whole, like, dude, I just got a new pair of skates for the first time in like 10 years. I used to see it as a kid, but I was like, you know what? I'm older. I've got more time during the winter, so I'm like, get back to skating. And that set me back like 200 something bucks.
Yeah,
I'm like,
it's ridiculous. It's really ridiculous. It's like our parents used to go and buy these things when we were younger, and they'd be like $20 now. No,
not anymore. Oh, I wish. But and it's funny. My dad was with me, and we were at Sport Check, and we were looking at some sticks afterwards. I was curious, was bored. Like, I haven't played actual hockey in years, but we were looking at sticks, and my dad's like, these are like $300-400, and I'm like, yep. And he goes, how do parents afford this? And I go, that's a great question. It's hard to, which is why we're seeing, like, especially with like with youth hockey programs in Canada, we're seeing those numbers drop a lot. We're seeing a huge nosedive, right? And for minority communities, a lot of these parents look at those prices for sticks, for registration fees, and all that, and realistically, they're like, I am busting my ass to make sure my family's surviving. I don't know if I can afford to do this, like, because it's a lot.
I'll be open and honest. with me, we managed to get the registration fee because that's something we work out in our budget yearly.
Mm-hmm.
It's something we have to do because I always believed that my children, as long as they want to do it, we're going to do it.
Right.
The moment they say we're done, it's done. Because when I was younger, my dad pushed me too far to the point where I almost hated everything I did.
Right.
Where with my kids, yes, there's times where my dad gets in my head a little bit. He rest his soul. He's been gone 20 years almost. Mm-hmm. But there's times where he gets in my head and I kind of do it with my oldest, who is super competitive like I am. Yeah. And then I go back and later that night and I'm like, well, I didn't mean it like this. It was just a heat of the moment conversation. Let's talk about what the day was.
Right. Exactly.
But what my point was is the registration fees are crazy in itself. And then the equipment is upwards of $1,000 depending what they need that year. If they don't need everything, awesome.
Yeah.
If they need everything,
but if it's rough.
And I'm grateful to have great in-laws who pitch in. They're both retired now that they're like, here, this is some money that we don't care about, which is cool for them. It's like,
right.
Also, they buy my kids their sticks and stuff, which is huge with the way they've been growing. So, but there is something I want to talk about, and I'm going to give it a little bit of a warning here. This will probably be a couple-minute conversation. So if you don't want to hear, skip ahead. I do want to talk about you growing up in Canada being, I know you're Canadian, but you grew up in an immigrated family. Yeah. What is racism that you faced growing up?
Oh man. So here's the funny thing. And I know it's not a joking matter, but I laugh about it for a reason. So I lived in the US for about 5 years when I was in college. I did my undergraduate in the city of Boston. Ugh. I hate the Bruins. Anyway, everybody does. So weirdly enough, I have faced more racism in Canada than I ever did in the US. And I was there during the Trump presidency.
Jesus.
Right. So growing up, it's funny. I think back about this now, or I think back about these things now and I go, God, that was fucked up when you think about it. So I was born in 96. By the time I was like, in like grade, 2, 3, it's a few years after 9/11. Mm-hmm. Right. And I'm brown. So that makes my life a lot more interesting. Right. Because, the wars were going on at the time and there was a huge negative stigma.
Not just the
yeah. Yeah. There was a lot going on of like, hating just brown people in general, because the assumption is that everyone's a terrorist, right? And back then I had a lot of like kids I grew up with. They were always making those jokes like, oh fuck, like they're talking about like what's the old that stereotype that terrorists do, that high-pitched scream. I know Family Guy jokes about it a lot. That thing. So growing up, I always just kind of like laughed it off because I never realized the negative repercussions of it. And at the same time, like you realize like that's facing racism right there, but I kind of just shrugged it off every time, like, okay, whatever. And as I got older, I'm like, oh my God, like, the amount of shit I had gone through back then was insane. These like I was like 8, 9 years old, and these things were happening. But growing up to immigrant parents, it's always an interesting thing to talk about because my parents are immigrants. Yeah, my dad's side of the family lived in Montreal for quite some time, so they weren't like your typical, immigrant. The other thing too is, my dad especially, holy shit, he is like one of the hardest, if not, he's the hardest working man I've ever met. And seeing that every day and then hearing, other immigrant stories around there, you kind of wonder like, okay, what's going on. But, growing up with racism, I think a big part of it was just, you never really knew where the line was when you were younger of like what is offensive to you and what isn't. And for me, I kind of just shrugged it all off because I'm like, whatever, it doesn't actually hurt me that much. But I'll tell you one thing. I've had this happen whenever I fly back and forth from the US or whenever I'm traveling. The most ridiculous conversations I'll have with a border officer is when I come home to Canada. Despite me holding a Canadian passport and being born in this country, it'll just be the most ridiculous conversations ever. I'm like, dude, I'm like, okay, here's a story. So After I had moved to Boston for school, I flew back for Canadian Thanksgiving. I had a long weekend that week anyway, so I'm like, okay, I have some time to fly back, come see my parents, have dinner, do all that, and then go back for school. So I flew. My flight was delayed coming into Toronto, so I didn't get into Toronto until like midnight or something when I was supposed to get there at like 9:30. And I get all my stuff. I'm going through customs, and the officer there is like, "Where you come from?" I'm like, "Boston, Massachusetts," and I'm there for school. The whole thing. And I go, "Okay, how long are you going to be in Canada?" I go, "I don't think you are allowed to ask me that."
When I live here,
Because I live here. And she goes, "Who are you staying with?" I go, "My parents. I'm just home visiting for the weekend for Thanksgiving." And it became a whole thing. I'm like, oh, whatever. But things like that. I will say, I think the more I am, like, as I've gotten older, I've started to see a lot more just like not even discreet, just subtle racist remarks and whatnot thrown at me. And I take it with a grain of salt, because it's not so much I don't think it harms me. It more so is a reflection on the character of the people that are saying those things.
100%.
Yeah. Like, yeah.
Right.
Sorry, you're saying.
No. What I was gonna say is, like, where I live a little bit north of you.
Yeah.
A couple hours. I live in a very predominantly white community.
Right.
Not very many ethnic backgrounds here. I mean, you see, there's an Asian family here, maybe one or two black families here. I think I've only seen a handful of brown people here. Like, it's not like Toronto where I grew up, right? Like,
right, yeah.
And my wife had never experienced racism much. Like you, she got the jokes of here and there, but hers is around, what convenience store you running today? Kind of bullshit, right?
Yeah.
It's not. It is funny in the time, but now when you look back, that's not fucking funny. But what really killed it for her, and this conversation I had to have with my oldest recently, the pandemic hit.
Oh yeah.
And my wife being Asian, my children being Asian, they faced a lot of backlash. Yeah. And it was really disheartening to be out in public at times where we didn't want to go out.
Yeah. No, I get that 100%. I mean, so I grew up in the Richmond Hill, Markham area. Like, I kind of live on the border of both cities. And when I was growing up, the area I live in specifically is very predominantly Asian. Like, of all different, like, there's a lot of, mainland Chinese, Korean, not a lot of Japanese, but Taiwanese, things like that, right? And Markham's kind of known for that at this point, and so is like this side of Richmond Hill. But the pandemic was not a great time for all that. And even here's the thing: I'm South Asian, technically, right? Like, I'm not Eastern, but oh man, if I mention to people that I'm from like the Markham area, they're like, "Oh, is that where everything's spreading?" And I'm like, "Yo, can you shut the fuck up?" Like, it's not even directed at me, and I feel like ashamed,
Yeah, it's disheartening, right? It's
incredibly disheartening.
And I've had to tell my kids, like, this is shit you're gonna have to face your entire life.
Yep.
And I've told them, don't ignore it. Don't embrace it either.
No.
Make sure you stand on where you stand. You stand on business when you talk about that. Don't let people talk down to you.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that can drag you down really quickly if you don't know how to handle it in the moment. It's not as much as I want to say it is. It's not something you can take and then think on for like a few days. Like, you gotta sort of tackle it there, right? Like, dude, I was downtown. It was like a few months ago. Some random friggin' dude just walking around the street seemed pretty pissed off. I don't know what and didn't really care, didn't want to ask because
it's Toronto.
You just look at it. Yeah, it's Toronto. Who knows? He's just saying random shit, and he sees me and he goes, he's like, "What do you want from me, huh? You dirty packy. Go back to where you're from." And I'm like, "Brother, this is where I'm from. Like, what do you like?" I've heard, it's so funny. During living in the U.S. during the Trump presidency, you would think the racism thing would be huge. Luckily, in Boston, it's not that bad. As much as the people are kind of dicks sometimes, and there's a lot of respectful people. Yeah, and dumb. Yeah. Oh boy. Oh. But at some point, I had a colleague of mine at school, actually. We were talking about everything with the Trump presidency and, maybe leaving and going back to Toronto because things were not just great in the US, but she's from the Toronto area as well. So this kind of struck me as weird when she brought this up, but we were like, yeah, I'm sticking here. I'm going to stick through it. Like it can't be that bad. Right. And she goes, well, you go back to where you're from. And I'm like, dog, I'm from Richmond Hill, Ontario. Like, you and I are from the same province. At the end, she's like hyping herself up, and she's like, well, my family is like 3 generations born in Canada, and that, like, even that is subtle racism in itself, right? Because it's just the natural assumption of just because I'm born to immigrant parents, like, dog, at the same time, I was born here.
Right.
You and I have the same passport for the same reason.
I mean, I get that conversation because, like, my dad's side is Native. My mother's side, if you want to get technical, I'm only a 2nd generation Canadian.
Right.
Because depending how you look at the Native side of things, it's what it is. It's the first people. If you want to look at my mother's side, which is the Newfoundland side,
okay,
it's not a part of Canada until like the 50s.
Yep.
And technically, I'm only a 2nd generation Canadian.
Right. That's the thing. It's like, does that matter at the end of the day? No,
it doesn't. But there's people that will be like, whoa,
yeah,
whoa, whoa.
Right. Like I've dealt with that. Man, I had a student at U of T who genuinely was like, well, my family's been here, 4 generations, and I'm proud to be a Canadian. And I looked at her one day and I'm like, you're telling a guy who's born here, I don't care. Like, I'm a 1st generation Canadian, if that's what you want to call it. It's like my sister and I were born here. My parents weren't, right? But does that make a difference? Does that make you any better than me? No. Does that make me any lesser than people that were here since like the 1800s? No. Like, I don't know why this has to be such a big point.
I mean, we all live by invisible lines. So.
Right, exactly. So it's, I don't know.
One last thing I want to touch on, and
sure.
then I'm going to move past this subject.
Yeah, that's fine.
It is an important subject, but it's something we got to get past here. Now, and this is more a reference towards your mom and your dad and your family. Recently in Canada, we have become accustomed to a lot of immigration coming in, and not enough leaving. And I don't mean that rudely, but you can take
no. I know, yeah.
But when it comes to what I'm about to ask, this is more a reference to your parents, who are hardworking people in this country that came here with a dream.
Yeah.
And now you have the people that are coming here doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean, and I know what I mean.
100%.
How does that make you and your family feel? Because I'm assuming, if you, like you're saying, your dad's a very hardworking man, and I don't want to say this racistly, and I'm not trying to.
No, go ahead.
Brown people coming over here now are taking advantage and trying to change our customs.
Yeah, 100%.
I don't mean that racistly. That's just a fact.
My dad and I talk about this almost every day because it's becoming more and more of a problem. And his work staff at Tim's is predominantly immigrant. Right. It's all the whole stereotype people talk about with Tim Hortons of, like, it's all brown people there. He kind of he's been doing that for like 30 years, but hardworking people. Right. So to that point, when my dad and his family came to this country, they were already pretty well off. So, but my dad had a dream. That his dream was to, become successful in whatever way he could. And he busted his ass. He'd gone to school in Michigan for college. He finished his undergrad, he went back to Montreal because my grandparents were there at the time. He got a job working corporate with Wendy's, and then busted his ass working with Wendy's. Eventually got to working with Tim Hortons and whatnot, to the point where my dad was actually a big part of not the en routes, but those all those service stations up like the 404.
Yeah.
My dad was a big part of those being built.
Okay.
Like he was on the corporate side of things when those things were getting built way back when. So he's busted his ass. He's done his due diligence, and to the point where my mom didn't have to work as much, just focus on raising my sister and I when we were growing up. Didn't have to work, but still, an insured amount of work. What we're seeing now is this gigantic, just mass of immigrants showing up here, kind of expecting something rather than working for it.
I say this respectfully, but a free ride.
Oh yeah, 100%. You know, and okay, I can't even hide it because I've got family like that, and I tell them all the time, like, y'all are.
I got family like that too, and
yeah, but you know, it's. So my dad and I, we both went to school in the States. Obviously, he went long before I did, but you know, when you go to the school in the States, you have to be there on a visa, right?
Mm-hmm.
My dad and I had the same idea. When we were done school, go back to Canada, just work, do your thing. Don't overextend or try to overstay your visa because the government will come after you. Because it's illegal. You're there illegally at that point, right?
You're not supposed to be there.
Yeah, and it's the same thing that's happening here. Is, you know, there's so many immigrants coming in, and they're overstaying. Like, they're here on a school visa wherever they go. A lot of them go to like Seneca or whatever, but they end up either failing out, dropping out, or just barely getting by. And then they're here working like small menial jobs that have nothing to do with what they went to school for. Then for immigration, it's kind of a necessary, like you have a year to do that, but they're overstaying their visas, just doing nothing. And I every time I'm like, well, why are you, you know, when people are complaining, I get it that people are complaining, being like, oh, well, we're deporting all these people and whatnot. They deserve to be here, you know.
Unfortunately, that's not always the case.
Unfortunately, that is not always the case. And, you know, the fact of the matter is, hey, are you legally allowed to be a resident here or like working here? If the answer is no, because you did something like overstay your visa or your visa's expired, like whatever it might be, I'm sorry, but we can't have that happening here because it's become a mess. It's just become a gigantic mess here. And this is coming from someone that is brown. Like, as much as I want to, you know, stand up for my fellow brown people, it's like, no, this is a humongous problem that's going on right now.
That's exactly why I was asking, is because like we don't see many other countries like China and stuff coming this way anymore. And if they do, it's to the west. It's never the east.
Yeah.
Right? The eastern people are seeming to come to the eastern side of Canada, and Ontario alone in itself, and you know this as much as I do, it's a shit show right now.
Oh yeah.
With just our provincial government and everything, and all the way down.
Yeah, that's a whole thing. Good. But you know, my dad and I were we were somewhere downtown. We were taking an Uber, and we were talking. Uber driver was like an Indian guy, and my dad was chit chatting with him because my dad's a pretty friendly dude. So we were chit chatting with the Uber driver for a few minutes on the car ride. And he goes, so what are you doing? Are you in school? And he goes, oh no, sir. I dropped out of school. My dad goes, okay, so you're on your work visa, I guess, or, you know, you're just driving Uber. Do you not have another job that you do? And he goes, no, my visa actually expired yesterday. And I'm just trying to find things to do. And my dad goes, you know, you can get caught, right? Like, you can get sent back to India. And he goes, oh, I'm not worried. And my dad goes, well, why aren't you worried? He goes, well, the Uber driver is like, my dad owns like a factory business in India and makes like bajillions of dollars. He's like, I don't have to worry about anything. And I go, there it is. Now, obviously not the case for everyone, but the problem is it's the privilege of a lot of these people that come here and they sort of just assume they're going to get a free ride and do whatever the hell they want to. And you're like, no, you gotta do your work, do that. Like, you know, if I ever had to talk about two immigrant stories, to really show to people, this is what hard work looks like. The two people I'm using are my own father as an example, and Nav Bhatia, the Raptors super fan.
Okay.
Yeah, came here from India with like literally nothing. Worked as a janitor. He just happened to really like, he got into basketball when he came to Canada. And he owns like, he's a massive. He's wealthy. He's incredibly wealthy now. But and he's worked his way up. And same thing with my dad. Like, they've worked their way up. They had the perseverance. They had the mindset to want to succeed in a new environment. And what we're seeing a lot of now is a lot of people going, yeah, well, if I don't succeed here, I could just go back. Why the fuck are you here? What, like it sounds horrible out of context.
It does.
But when you think about it, you're like, why are you wasting your time here then?
The reason I brought up this conversation too, a lot of my listeners are American and they don't quite understand that we do have problems as much as they do.
Oh yeah, we do.
and you've been living in both countries, you understand that too. Now we're gonna go back to a more upbeat. Well, I don't know if you want to consider this upbeat. I want to talk about your favorite wrestler.
Oh no, here it comes.
Now I know this from conversations at the pub with you and just discussing just before we went into recording. Your favorite wrestler happens to be a man that is probably taboo in a lot of the wrestling world now.
Oh, he's very taboo in the wrestling world.
I don't think it should be, but here we are, 17, 18 years later kind of thing. But your favorite wrestler is Chris Benoit.
Yes, it is.
And even over pints, we're very much intelligent enough to understand that we can separate the man from the artist.
Yes.
Now, you had mentioned that when you mention to people, it's kind of like a situation. So go into that a little bit with me. How did you become a fan of Pegasus Kid?
So like I mentioned, my first real memory of wrestling was the Raw after the 2004 Rumble, after he had won. And for me, seeing him, he's not the biggest guy in the world. He's not your Hogan, your Savage, Andre, that kind of, he wasn't he was what, 5'11", I think, 6 foot maybe, which back then was
a good day.
I think on a good day 6 foot, but he wasn't the biggest looking dude. Yeah, he looked jacked, but he wasn't huge. You know what I mean? And growing up, I was like, whoa, that guy looks cool. He's not this almost artificial looking wrestler. Because you look back at the new generation era, you think about it now, and everyone looks just everyone was on roids. Yeah, right. But with Benoit, it was oh, this guy's cool. And the way he wrestled was so different. I didn't grow up watching Bret Hart, but, a guy that was able to just scrap and was so quick despite his, bulky frame and everything.
Right.
And, Benoit's a big reason of why I got really interested in, submission wrestling and grappling. So, yeah, that kind of is where it all stemmed from. And, then he won the world title at WrestleMania 20, and I'm like, this is cool, this is awesome. And just watching him on TV, whenever I could tune into Raw, that's kind of why I just stuck to WWE every now and then, was to see what Chris Benoit was doing. Yeah, that was really, because for me, he was a different guy. He wasn't this previous generations guy where he was huge, roided out, and just simplicity in professional wrestling. He really brought a different level of intensity to it that I got really interested in. And that's kind of where that all stems from.
Now, that being said, on that subject,
mm-hmm.
Okay, sorry, I got lost in train of thought there. That being said, on that subject, being a Benoit fan around the time you were, and just being still rather new to him at that point of, again, if you don't want to hear it, it's going to be said, skip 2-3 minutes ahead.
Yeah.
The murders, the suicide, which allegedly, and I'm using this allegedly because we don't have the actual hard facts, and I'm not ignoring what happened, but me and you do not have the whole cold hard facts. Unfortunately, we don't, and I'm not going to say we do.
No.
Growing up with your wrestling friends and people that you knew, your mutuals, how did they feel when you're yeah, I'm still a Chris Benoit guy?
A lot of it was very negatively taken, obviously, because it was, at that point, all my friends in school that were also watching wrestling stopped watching wrestling after everything happened. I did too for a bit, but not for the reasons they had. For me, it was more distraught. For them, it was oh my God, someone this guy killed people. We can never watch this again. For me, it was, oh my God, my hero is gone. Yeah, I know what happened, but I just couldn't believe any of it. I was 11 at the time. I couldn't believe a thing. I was like, what do you mean he did all this allegedly? But a lot of it was met with negative. Even, fast forward to now, right?
It's still very much met with negativity.
Yeah, right. And I get it. I get it. But there's a way we can separate art from the artist.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, being a musician, we have to do this a lot.
Unfortunately.
Because a lot of our heroes happen to be scumbags.
Right.
or horrible, whatever it might be, right? It's like, if you can't separate the art from the artist, that's fine. But we live in a world where people have their opinions on things, and that's fine. You're entitled to your own opinion, whatever, right?
It could be wrong, but you're still a fucking asshole. But yeah, continue.
Yeah, exactly, right. Yeah, hey, you're a piece of shit, but I think it's a matter of being able to understand that person's perspective.
Yeah,
is what still makes us human. And for me, trying to really, I don't fight for it as much anymore, but I do push the point that no matter what, even after all that, and knowing the circumstances and things and all that, I can separate the man from the wrestler.
Right.
I will always be a Chris Benoit guy.
That's fair. I mean, what really bugs me, and I understand this is vastly different. Just make this clear what I'm about to say. I have vastly different circumstances and vastly different things. But the same people that'd be like, oh, fuck Chris Benoit, are still the people that are welcoming Hulk Hogan on your TV screen every other week.
Yep.
And in today's world, racism, it could be just as bad as considered as murder.
Yeah, especially with how everything went down in the US. But, it's so strange to me because, I've had this fight with people before where, okay, recent things, right? And again, this is allegedly, but for me saying, hey, my favorite wrestler is Chris Benoit, I get looked at like, what the fuck's wrong with you? I have those same people telling me, man, I really wish Brock Lesnar was back when he's been named allegedly in the Vince McMahon fiasco.
I'm a big Lesnar guy, and I stand by the artist, not
the
person.
Not the person. Yeah. Like, okay, so if you're going to go after me for being a Benoit guy, but you're here every week after Raw going, oh, why can't we have Brock Lesnar back? Where's Brock? We need Brock back. Like, Brock's kind of busy because he's been named in the biggest case to happen in wrestling since Benoit. Right. So we got to, there's a line that can be drawn.
Yeah, for sure. Last wrestling question that I can think of at the moment, and then I want to go into some music conversation.
Okay, sure thing.
Favorite match of all time, and I guess it's a two-parter. Should Chris Benoit, Nancy be in the Hall of Fame?
To answer the second question, yes.
Okay.
I fully believe it. They should be.
Even if Benoit doesn't go, Nancy deserves
Nancy deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I know there's obviously going to be push and pull whether or not they should have Benoit in the Hall of Fame, but for his accomplishments in professional wrestling, he should be. For what he did in the WWE, he should be. Right? Anyway, okay. Ooh, favorite match of all time. Ah, man. You know what? I have to think about this every couple of years because there's always something that happens.
Okay,
where you're like,
let me change it up a little bit then.
Okay.
How about the favorite match of this era? Not the 2010 era, but the era that you've watched in. Does that help narrow it down?
Yeah, that helps. Oh, okay. So like the era. Wait, okay. So
from like we'll say 2012 to now. So 12 years.
2012 to now. What do we know now? I'm trying to think.
There's been a lot of bangers.
There have been a lot of like low-key bangers. Well, you can't say Punk Cena because that was 2011. So
well, you can if that's the one you want to go with. I mean, that's
definitely up there. I think for me, I got it. I know exactly what it is. It's a New Japan match, and it's the match that really got me to love professional wrestling again. And it's AJ Styles versus Shinsuke Nakamura at the Tokyo Dome, Wrestle Kingdom 8, I think it was, or whatever year it was, 2016.
I just don't remember the.
It is a beautiful 34 minutes of some of the best wrestling I've just ever seen. Some of the best storytelling of two guys that had never been in the ring together one-on-one until that night. And I watch that match maybe once a year to remind myself how beautiful professional wrestling can be.
Fair.
But that again, people back then with New Japan, everything was like always really good and matches were well produced then, so it makes sense. But like WWE, it probably would be either Punk, Cena, because it blurred the lines of reality to a point where no one knew what the hell was going on anymore, which was awesome. But you know what? 2015. There's a lot of really fun matches from like 2014, 2015 that people forget about. Not a lot. Well, there were a few good ones here and there. But honestly, like I'll say this, I think one of my favorite matches of all time that truly goes overlooked when you talk about good WrestleMania matches and specifically good WrestleMania main events is Edge versus Undertaker in the main event of 24.
Yes.
People forget how good that match was.
Yeah, because a lot of people are recency biased assholes.
Yeah, exactly. So that's definitely up there. But
for me, my favorite match, and this is just biased maybe because I'm a huge Wyndham fan, 2017 Elimination Chamber when he captured his first WWE Championship. That was poetic in every sense. Like everybody, the way it fell, it was perfect.
Yeah. If Chris Benoit is my first favorite wrestler of all time, I think Bray Wyatt might be my second. And that's changed over the years, but I think with everything, he's become my second favorite. And it never was because of how good of a wrestler he was, but it was everything, his devotion to character work. Right. Like the Bray Wyatt, the when it was the Bayou Cult Leader thing was like, oh, what the hell's going on? This is really, really cool. But weirdly enough, for me, like I have some friends that are also huge Bray Wyatt, huge Wyndham fans, and God rest his soul, man. Oh my God. I still can't believe he's gone. But when he started doing the Firefly Funhouse shit, the Mr. Rogers, Jekyll and Hyde shows up in a red, like for 4 straight Halloweens, I would be Firefly Funhouse Bray. I'd get like a pair of khakis, I'd get the black gloves, I'd get like a black dress shirt, and then I have like a red sweater that I would wear over it. And I'd either bring like my sister's stuffed animals or something and just like have them laid out in like a little set in like the fun house. But that got me to a point where it was like, this is wild because it's such a simple idea of this Mr. Rogers character being like, hi, everyone, we're going to talk about friendship. And then I'm going to kill you.
Right.
It's
like every bit of our childhood come back, and it's like, holy fuck.
Exactly, right. Yeah, it's like, oh, wait, what the hell's going on here? No, man, that Elimination Chamber always will, it's always in my mind, because seeing him win that title, I was so happy. We don't talk about what happened after, but
yeah,
I get you there.
Well, I mean, you've seen my arm. It's got Bray's words on it.
Yeah, dude, that's the thing. Like, I'm actually, so I'm not a big, well, it's not a big thing in the Islamic faith to get tattoos, but I am considering getting that tattooed at some point.
And I don't ever push anybody to do anything, but that'd be awesome.
Then, yeah, exactly. Just as a tribute to him. But yeah.
Music. Switching gears to music real quick.
Right, yeah, let's go for it.
A couple opinions on things. Sure. Again, a very controversial subject. P. Diddy.
Oh boy, Jesus Christ.
Now, because you're a musician in this world,
yeah.
Do you find it fucked up that he took advantage of? Allegedly,
incredibly.
No, but a lot of it is very keen.
So. How do I put this nicely?
He's a fucking weirdo.
Yeah, well, that too. So a few years back, this is not to do with Diddy, but kind of the same line of, unfortunately, the same line of thing. The Metropolitan Opera of New York. They're like the biggest opera company in the United States. They have like all the funding in the world. They have some of the best musicians in the country. And their conductor, James Levine, like highly respected, highly regarded guy. And one day we find out that he got fired and was arrested for kind of the same things that Diddy was doing. And I go, what the fuck, of all people? Like, that's crazy. And my orchestra professor was telling me, he's like, we've known this for years. And I go, what do you mean you've known this for years? He goes, there are groups in New York that refuse to work with him because of that situation. And then with everything that came out about Diddy, you think about it and rappers in the 90s were always making diss tracks about each other or like some little hint. But when you realize how many rappers were talking about Diddy in that sense, it was like, you didn't think about it back then because you're like, okay, he's just throwing a barb at the guy. And then you listen to it now and you're like, oh, y'all have known for years.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. So it's an incredibly fucked up thing. And like, man, it's unfortunately it shows the dark side of humanity.
We need some Dark Side of the Ring hip hop.
We do need some Dark Side of the Ring hip hop, man. But with the whole situation, I mean, I hope that I kind of really hope that he gets locked up for God knows forever.
I hope he gets drowned in lube.
That too. That'd be
or
funny.
baby oil, whatever.
All that lube, yeah. And then you also have to unfortunately realize the affiliations he had with people,
right?
Especially with celebrities, right? Is like there are a lot of people that were involved in those.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that know. The question is, how many people are willing to speak up?
I mean, I touch on this, and then I'm going to move into a more lighthearted subject.
Sure.
Canadian-born musician that was a very young age when he entered the scene under P. Diddy, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
And Usher kind of took him there.
Yep.
And Justin Bieber.
Yep.
And he has been quite silent about this entire ordeal. From my recollection, I don't do too much digging, but everything I've noticed, there's not been much out of Justin Bieber.
No, and I think part of it with Justin is, with the illness that he was suffering from, that he had to cancel his tour for, he just became a father, things like that. Obviously, he's got other things in his life that he's been dealing with. But when all this came out, yeah, you notice he's been incredibly silent. And I think part of that is because what do you say in that situation? Because I know for a fact he wouldn't be defending Diddy.
Well, you would hope not.
No, obviously not. But it's hard to want to tell your side of the story, especially when that was a big part of his career being, shot to the moon, basically.
Yeah.
Because one wrong thing, you don't know who's listening, and that could cause some trouble.
And then you end up
mind you, P. Diddy is also tied to the murder of Tupac Shakur.
And it wouldn't be surprising if he's tied to Biggie eventually as well.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I'd understand if it's hard for Justin to want to come out and talk about this, especially like he just became a father,
there's a lot of protection now, right?
And there's a lot of protection. Yeah. Plus, Justin made the smart move of kind of getting out of the spotlight. I think it was the best move for him because he was going through a lot, and a lot of that could have been the repercussions of all that with Diddy. But I don't blame him for not saying anything right now, because what do you say? Yeah, I'm sure I would want him to say something. I'm sure a lot of people do.
Well, we're all under the assumption that he is a victim, right? We don't fully know until it all comes out.
Right.
If it ever does, we won't know.
If it ever does. But that's, yeah.
All right, switching into a little bit more light conversation.
Sure.
Linkin Park just came back.
Yes, they did.
And you, being a musician, I mean, me, I love it. I'm a big Linkin Park fan. I appreciate what they're trying to do. I appreciate what they're trying to do. They're not trying to replace Chester. They made that very clear. And despite the internet world not agreeing with that, I digress. What is your take on Emily Armstrong coming in and now taking over vocals of the next chapter? And I say it like that because this is what it is. The next chapter of Linkin Park.
I have this conversation a little too often. No, I'm not even joking. Like, this comes up way too often with people because a lot of people know I loved Linkin Park growing up and all that. But when they announced that Emily was coming on to be the new vocalist for the band and this is the new direction they're going in, it's the new chapter of the band, at first I was a little hesitant. I'm like, okay, cool. But after hearing okay, I gotta say this. I have to say this because I have friends, I have family that have been like, oh, but she's not Chester. That's not the fucking point.
It's not.
That was never the goddamn point. They were not trying to replace Chester. This is still that same band. You have to get over it. Mm-hmm. You have to get over it. Because the thing, when they did that live stream show, when they basically announced that Emily was coming on to join the band and they had a new album that they were, which at the time of recording this, I think comes out next week. But
actually, it comes out this weekend.
Oh, is it this weekend? Shit.
15th.
Yeah. So, with all that being said, people were too eager to jump. They were way too quick. They were too quick to jump on that live stream performance announcing everything because they were doing all their old stuff, and everyone's like, oh, but she's not Chester, this isn't the same. When you hear the new stuff that they're doing that she's on,
it makes sense.
It makes sense, and it kind of grows on you. You're like, I get it. Okay, cool. Because here's the thing, it's not like their sound changed. Yes, I understand,
but not in the sense of not
in the sense of like production. Like, I understand that Chester was such a pivotal and vital part of that band, but
it still wasn't his band. A lot of people forget that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that too, it wasn't his band, but where Linkin Park is now with that new record coming out, it feels very Minutes to Midnight era.
Yeah,
like the heavier side of Minutes to Midnight, and I kind of like that because I really do like that album. But people need to understand that this is a new chapter for the band, right? This is a new step going forward. You're gonna have to live with it, and if you don't like it, if you don't like it, you can leave. You don't have to waste your time complaining on the goddamn internet to do.
Well, I can listen to the old stuff only. Then it doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. Listen, if you want to just listen to the old stuff, go listen to the old stuff. If you don't want to listen to the new stuff, that's fine, right? Here's the thing with bands too, and I talk about one of my best friends from high school. Him and I were driving home from a show one night, and this was like 2 years ago. And he just goes, do you feel like a band is the same if a certain member is replaced? Like the ship of Theseus, the metaphysics argument, where like the ship is rotting, so they replace all the parts. Is it still the same ship when they've replaced everything? That kind of thing. We think about it with a band. It's a whole thing. And I was like, yes and no. It depends on who. Like, take Queen, for example, right? Freddie Mercury's been dead for fucking ever. And they got Adam Lambert. Is it still the same band? Yeah. But it's definitely a different feeling of the band.
But I'm going to let you continue your point, but the thing that pisses me off the most, and I brought this up in an argument, is there wasn't nearly as much uproar when Adam stepped in to do Queen than there is when Emily is stepping into Linkin Park. And Queen, arguably a lot huger than Linkin Park.
Yeah.
100%. And they're nowhere near this up.
Even I don't know if you're a big like classic rock guy, but my dad still gets pissed off about this all the time. When Journey announced that Arnel Pineda was going to be their new vocalist, the amount of people I would see that be like, well, he's not Steve Perry. That's not the goddamn point that he's not Steve Perry. He sounds incredible. Get over it. Like,
there's tons of bands that have done it.
Yeah, right. That's the thing. Tons of bands done it. And you're right. There wasn't as much uproar when they announced Adam Lambert. Because I think at that point, Adam Lambert was just getting off his American Idol hype. And everyone was like, oh, yes, he's perfect for it. And then they announced Emily Armstrong as the new vocalist. Now, I understand that there might be some things about Emily that people aren't a fan of, like, the Scientology thing, which is apparently, I
also kind of doubt that people dug that far into her life, but I digress.
Yeah, but that's kind of just how the internet is these days, man. Like, okay, you're a hockey fan. Do you remember, like 5 years ago when the Blues won the cup? The first thing people did was dig into Jordan Binnington's life and found some tweets that he made when he was like 18.
Or the fact that they went back and brought up Ryan O'Reilly crashing his truck into a Tim Hortons.
Right, exactly. They're like, oh, but he's like, dude. That was years ago. Why are you are spending precious time on this earth?
The biggest thing I have
this shit and just complain.
I'm a huge Linkin Park, like yourself, fan.
Yeah.
I have a signed picture of the entire band.
Oh, nice.
Luckily, I have Chester's autograph on there. Huge Chester thing. The biggest argument I'll raise to anybody that wants to complain about Emily stepping in: the songs that you are so attached to when it comes to Linkin Park and her touching them. They're songs directly written between Mike and Chester, which Chester has real emotion in because that's stuff he was feeling. That's why that sounds the way it does, because there is emotion. Yeah. Emily's singing it. She doesn't have that attachment to the song. She doesn't know the range of emotion that it dictates.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of people are failing to see.
I think people forget that the Chester we all witnessed in those prime years of Linkin Park, especially like Hybrid Theory is one of my favorite albums of all time. That was an emotionally fueled Chester Bennington that we were listening to. And you don't understand that. And even when they would play live, like that's all that's going through his mind in those moments when he's going through those songs again, right? Like that, for him, his take on screaming, it's not like what you see in love, like metal and whatnot now, where it's like super low, guttural kind of thing. It's just emotionally fucking fueled. I get it, man.
Screaming, literally. It's not.
Yeah, he's just literally screaming.
He's just screaming.
He's just screaming. And yeah, for the people that are like, oh well, Emily doesn't have the same context.
No, not at all. And another comparison I like to make is me and you. We grew up on the Linkin Park era of Chester.
Yes.
My daughter, 5 years old, she is now getting to grow up on the era of Emily.
Right.
In the park. I can play Emptiness Machine while I'm in the car driving with her. And my daughter,
great song, by the way.
My daughter can almost word for word sing it.
Yeah. Because
she likes it.
Yeah.
I get to bond with my children over the same band, just a different version.
Yep. I think that's a beautiful thing. It's huge.
So yeah.
And at the end of the day, it's not like it's two different bands.
Nope.
Yeah. And I completely get you there.
And like you said, the people running to the live stream to complain, they're not going to drop their whole new album on the live set. They have it, 100%. They have it, but they're not going to introduce you to that album. No. And so they're running off the old stuff because that's what we know. And now as they progress with their records, the old stuff will start to fade, which isn't bad because that's not hers.
Yeah.
But going forward, Mike and her are going to introduce this new albums. I'm sure they got a couple in the works.
Yeah.
That we're going to get accustomed to.
Yeah. The other thing too is no matter what, those albums aren't disappearing from humanity. They're not disappearing from existence. Hybrid Theory, Meteora, Minutes to Midnight, like those are all still here. I
also love the fact that this album is Zero. It's such a nice, nonchalant way of paying homage to the beginnings and the new era.
Which, like, I feel like that's kind of the way it should have been done. And I'm glad they're going that route.
All right. We've done some music talk. We've done some wrestling talk. I got to ask you, how the fuck did you become a Detroit Red Wing fan?
Here we go. So like I said, my dad, I know, right? Of all things, like I said, my dad had gone to school in Michigan. Right. And when I would go, I have some family just outside of the Detroit area in Southeast Michigan. And when I was growing up and when we go visit them, this was, the late 90s, early 2000s. The Red Wings happened to be one of the best fucking teams in the league because they were just either winning cups or constantly making like the second or third round. Right.
Before they became the Dead Wings.
Yeah. Before. Oh, God damn it. So, growing up watching Steve Yzerman, Brendan Shanahan, Igor Larionov, Sergei Fedorov, Chris Osgood, eventually Dominik Hasek in 2002, a young Pavel Datsyuk, like, and seeing Nick Lidstrom in the late 90s, early 2000s. For me as a kid, you don't really you just have like attachments to things at that point. Right. And for me, my attachment ended up being the Red Wings and just Detroit sports in general. But for me, the Red Wings have been, the one thing I'll always have love for at the end of the day. And so that's how I ended up being a Red Wings fan, which is hilarious living in the greater Toronto area, because anytime I bring it up, people look at me and go, what the hell's wrong with you? And when I explain that part to them, they understand.
But you're a genuine hockey fan, which a lot of people in Toronto are just Toronto fans. Yeah. For me, I grew up, I fell in love with hockey because of a very infamous franchise in the Disney series, which is the Mighty Ducks.
Of course, the Ducks, yes.
That drew me into hockey. I still love that jersey. I still own one.
It's such a nice jersey.
Now, when I started watching professional hockey, I was on the other side of your rivalry. I was a big Avs fan. I loved Sakic, Forsberg, Foote, Blake, Waugh.
Yeah.
And I appreciate Detroit Red Wings history. And I did appreciate everything about Detroit. I will never, unless it's a shit talking session between me and you or me and some other guys.
Sure, I get that.
I will shit on them, but I still respect the franchise. Just like I grew up 100%. A Celtics fan. I respect the shit out of the Lakers, Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal.
Yeah.
I respect those guys, but I'm a Celtics fan.
Yeah.
Right. I grew up in a whole Boston fan except for the Bruins because fuck the Bruins.
You know what's funny is I also kind of grew up a Boston fan for a little bit. Like the Celtics have always been like my basketball team. So I kind of get you there. And when I was living in Boston, it was interesting, but that was a whole other. Yeah.
Like the Raptors are there. Like, well, I'll cheer for them because of their home team. Like,
yeah, exactly. Right. But they've never been, the Celtics were always more. It's right. I know people will be like, oh, so you were a bandwagoner? No, it just seemed cool at the time. So fuck it. Like when you're a kid, if you're calling a kid a bandwagoner, the hell's wrong with you?
Right. I mean, as a grown adult, you still get that. And it's like, no, like,
no. Yeah.
People shit on me because I'm a big Nas fan too, like you. I'm a big Kadri guy. I'm a huge Knights fan. Like I've watched. Right. So Nazem Kadri, naturally, I just gravitate where he goes. Mm-hmm. And I got shit on by a lot of Maple Leaf fans when I cheered for Kadri winning the cup. And I was like, what is wrong with you? I appreciate him as a player.
I remember the day he got traded. And I had a buddy of mine, die-hard Leafs fan. He texted me. He was like, oh my God, who did they trade him for? Tyson Barrie, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that worked out well.
That worked out great, didn't it?
I mean, it didn't work out either way, but
no, it really didn't. But so he's like, oh my God, they traded for Tyson Barrie. This is crazy. And I go, dude, they traded Nas. What are you talking about? Like, cool, you have a puck moving offensive defenseman. You have Morgan Riley already. Why the fuck do you need two? More importantly, why Nas? And he was like, oh, dude, Nas was dead weight. And that day, him and a bunch of other of my Leafs fans that were like, my Leafs fan friends that were like, oh my God, they traded Nazem Kadri. Hi, he's finally gone. Oh my God. I said to them that day, mark my fucking words. He's winning a Stanley Cup in Colorado. He's going to win a Stanley Cup in Colorado. And y'all will be sorry when it happens. Fast forward a few years, he ends up winning. Not to mention, he ends up like balling out that season and has a great playoffs, even with the broken thumb, comes back and scores the game winner in game 4 of the finals against Tampa. When he won that cup, he lifts it in the air, and I genuinely had a moment. Like I started crying because I'm like, this dude has been through so much shit in Toronto. And you understand that Leafs fans were not grateful for Kadri's time there.
I mean, you think about it, you're just as much on Twitter as I am. And Leafs fans, I'm a Leafs fan, but holy fuck, they're the most toxic pieces of shit in the world.
There's a couple good ones here and there.
Well, is.
Like, there's definitely a few. Like, I gotta shout them out while I'm here anyway. Like the Steve Dangle podcast does. Like, I go to all their events, and like Steve's a homie, Adam's a homie. Like they're all great dudes, and they're like the only few good Leafs fans I like.
Well, I'll put this into the context a little bit, and it kind of goes into the wrestling world because I'm sure you follow wrestling as well. Like there's good wrestlers like Days and stuff like that. Like those guys that cover properly, Dangle, Adam.
Yeah, exactly. All those kinds of guys. Yeah.
But then you have what I refer to the IWC. Which is
of course. Oh, I'm very aware of the IWC.
When you switch it to hockey, and it's the IHC in that hockey community, and the hockey community.
Well, okay, so it's funny. Phil and I had a conversation about this one day when we were hanging out. I had a friend of mine. Her and I were talking like hockey history, and she's like, I don't get why you're a Red Wings fan. I'm like, because they were really good and I love them. I don't know what else to tell you, right? And she goes, yeah, I guess so. The Leafs would have beaten you guys in 2002. And I'm like, who the fuck believes that except Leafs fans? You were not beating that Red Wings team, no matter what. Yeah, Dominic Hasek in net with Brett Hall on a line with fucking Pavel Datsyuk, a young Pavel Datsyuk,
and Belfour on the other side,
and like the literal Avengers of hockey were put together to win a Stanley Cup, and they did. The Leafs were not beating that team, and I'm like, I don't understand, or I don't know what it takes for Leafs fans to get things like that out of their head, where they're like, well, if we were in that situation, we could have. No. Dream all you want, even with this current roster. I respect the hell out of Austin Matthews. Love him as a player. Love watching him play. I have a hell of a lot of respect for William Nylander. Mitch is 50-50 depending on the season, because like great playmaker, not there in the playoffs, right? I'm like, you shouldn't not be paying
too much.
Yeah, and I'm like, you shouldn't be paying that guy that much if he's gonna be
I love that guy, but he got
exactly, right? Yeah, but what was it, 2 seasons ago or when they played Florida and they got past the first round finally, beating Tampa in overtime, great, and they go play the Panthers, and I genuinely had someone tell me, oh, well, if they were playing Vegas, they could have had a chance. Are you kidding me? Who are you kidding here? It's like every time they play Boston in the first round, right? Yeah. Every time they play the Bruins, every time there will always be at least 5 or 10 friends of mine that are diehard Leafs fans that are going, we can do this. I know we can do this. We can do this. It'll get to game 7. It'll get to overtime like it always has, except for 2019, I think it was, and 18 too. Anyway, it gets to overtime, right, in game 7. Again, they're like, okay, history says that they're going to choke, but they're like, I know this team can do it. And I'm like, can you be real for once in your life?
See,
you guys aren't winning?
I really hate this past year because losing to Boston in overtime sucked. Okay, 100%.
Oh, yeah.
Losing to Boston in overtime on my birthday.
Oh, man.
My day was so good.
I'm sure.
Right to shit.
They are very good at making people disappointed. I will say that. And again, hell of a respect to a lot of the players on Leafs, but with their fan base, it's like they need to understand that you guys, just because you're in Toronto, which is kind of the epicenter of the NHL, doesn't mean that the Leafs are going to be the epicenter of everything going on in hockey. Because at the end of the day, congrats, your regular season record looks pretty good. It's pretty consistent every season, right?
Right.
Win a cup.
That's just it.
Win a cup.
I live by this. Well, before I get to that point, 2021 we played Montreal. I think it was.
Yeah, the bubble year,
the Northern Division, whatever.
Yeah, the Northern Division bubble thing. Yeah.
It got to game 3. My buddy, shout out to Shay. He's a big Habs fan.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking on Discord at the time, and he's like, "Man, the Leafs look good. They're going to beat us. Like they were doing pretty good against them." And I was like, "Listen, if we beat you in 6, 100%. If it goes to 7, Habs are winning.
Habs are winning." Yep.
And he's like, "No, that's not how it's going to be. You guys are dominating us." I was like, "Okay." We get to game 7. I said, "Okay, good luck next round." He goes, "You're giving up?" I was like, "Nope. I just know how this goes."
Mm-hmm.
And it's not me giving up on the team. It's just me knowing game 7 in history.
You just understand how it works, right? You're like, okay, I know how this is going to go. At this point,
I've seen this story before. I don't like,
are you a big football guy at all?
Not particularly. Like I follow the Patriots. Still am a Patriots fan, despite Brady leaving. But I'm not enough to pay attention.
Okay, so for me,
I see the Lions doing good.
It was it's funny. Like the Patriots are actually my second favorite team, and like I was truly blessed to see them win 2 Super Bowls when I lived in Boston. So I got to see those parades, and I got to see Tom hold a beautiful time. Anyway, that to say, it was also coupled with years and years and years and years of misery being a Lions fan, right?
Yeah.
And then those last few years they've been good, and this year they're fucking lights out. They're great, but last year when they made the playoffs, we go into our wild card game with the Rams, and a friend of mine was like, "Oh, so you have high hopes? Like you probably have high hopes they're going to win." I go, "Nope. I have watched the Lions play only 2 other playoff games in my lifetime. I think 3 actually, and they all ended in the wild card round by the most ridiculous bullshit chance of magic thing happening." And I'm like, they are either losing this game like that, or they're winning by like a ridiculous something happening. They ended up winning, and I'm like, okay, awesome. And then I look at hockey, right? And like the Red Wings are not great right now, and that's fine. That's okay. I'm okay with the Red Wings not being great right now. I kind of want them to just grow. So I've been following the Leafs a lot, and yeah, I know how it goes, right? Like, I remember 2019, I believe it was. So it was my last year living in Boston. And the Leafs had the opportunity to close it out in game 6 in Toronto.
Yep.
And I remember watching that game, seeing how everything went, and the Bruins won. And I'm like, oh, they're done.
It's done. Yeah.
They're screwed is what's going to happen. And I ended up going to Game 7 that year at TD Garden. A friend of mine had extra tickets, and he texted me. He's like, "You want to go?" Sure. Now, I thought it'd be funny to show up in a Kadri jersey. I don't know how I'm still alive to this day, but
I don't know either.
I know, right? But I went to that game, and at a partner of mine at the time, who'd never seen a hockey game in her life, and she was like, "Oh, do you think Toronto's going to win?" I go, "Nope, they're going to get fucking destroyed. Is what's going to happen." And shocker, they did.
Yeah, I think it was like 5-0.
It's just it was something ridiculous. But I'm like, that's just how this goes, right? Like even this year against the Bruins, we were watching Game 7 from my relative's place in Michigan because I was visiting him for that weekend. And, Willie gets the goal. I'm like, okay, great. And then Hampus Lindholm ties it up, and I go, oh, they're losing. And my dad goes, what do you mean they're losing? I go, oh, they're I don't know what it is, but when things like that happen to the Leafs, their momentum and their morale just dives.
Well, I mean, this play lives just vigorously in my head is you have to be aware of who's on that ice.
Oh, yeah.
And allowing dump, and it's a full intentional dump the way it was done. Knowing the arena you're in, giving the home team the advantage to dump it the way they did, and Pastrnak just going right by you.
So there's a funny story about that play. One of my buddies who is from Rhode Island, he used to do vacant wrestling with us. Diehard Bruins fan. Well, after that game happened, whatever, Keefe got fired and all that. Him and I were texting each other about some stuff that was going on. And he goes, man, I can't believe they pulled that out again. I go, what are you talking about? And he goes, what do you mean? I go, what do you mean they pulled it out again? He goes, oh, he's like, the play they executed to win the game in overtime, right? I go, yeah, Lindholm dumps it off the side of the ice, rebounds off the board. Pastrnak comes in from behind, scoops it, slides in. I go, what do you mean? He goes, that is a play they used to execute all the time when Torrey Krug was still on the team. Mm-hmm. Torrey Krug was the point man on that. Pastrnak was the trigger man because Torrey Krug had an accurate enough shot where he would always practice rebounding off that specific side of the board because he knew it would slide off just at a certain angle enough for Pastrnak to come off the bench and then just go. And it worked every time. They stopped doing it when Torrey Krug was no longer a Bruin. They haven't done it since. And I'm like, you're telling me that the one time they pulled it out since then happened to just be against the Leafs? He goes, yep. I'm like, huh. That's the thing, right? You got to be aware of who's on the ice. Like, if you see that David Pastrnak is not there, you should probably figure out if he's actually on the ice.
Yeah.
If he's not on the bench,
I live by this, and I will die on this hill until it happens. Two things. One, Scotiabank Arena needs to be torn down, completely excavated, and move the arena somewhere else in the city because we're obviously on an ancient burial ground. And two, the Maple Leafs need to do what the Raptors did. Say, fuck the fans, the diehard fans, trade a fan favorite, and get over your hump.
Okay, so I have a question for you. We're going to switch roles for a second. If you were going to trade one Leaf, like if you were going to have a DeMar DeRozan, Kawhi Leonard size trade for the Toronto Maple Leafs, who do you trade?
I hate this because I love him with Marner.
Yeah, I figured as much.
You asked me 2 years ago, I say Matthews. I'm not a big fan of him.
Okay.
I respect him.
Mm-hmm.
I respect what he does. I'm just not a fan.
Okay.
I appreciate what he does for the Leafs. Marner is more of a guy that any team is willing to take on because they see that playmaking ability. Matthews is more, he's getting better.
Yeah.
But Matthews is more of a one-dimensional player right now. He's working on his two-way game. He's become a better player over the last year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, it was very one-sided, just offense, and that just didn't fly with me.
100%. Yeah, I feel like Marner's the obvious answer there. I know a lot of people used to say Willie, but
I believe that Willie should have been named captain.
Same. Actually,
I don't like the fact that the Leafs broke tradition, and because they only ever had Swedes or Canadians as captains.
Yeah, the first American to be captain of the Leafs. Like
I said, I love Marner. I have his first All-Star jersey signed that's hanging in my living room right now.
Oh, nice. Okay.
That would be my DeMar DeRozan trade right there.
Yeah,
that would shake up that core.
It would have to. Something needs to, right? Because like it doesn't. I don't know. The Leafs are such a hilarious team in that They have stuck with this core 4 idea since they got Tavares, and it hasn't worked at all. On that note, this is something I was talking to with a friend of mine like last week. Craig Berube is obviously the head coach now, right? And you can tell that they're not adjusting perfectly well to the Craig Berube ideology just yet. You're definitely seeing some changes, but not the changes we want to see out of them.
No, but like in WC, Leaf fans are, we need now. There's no
I know. They're like, what do you mean it's not working? I get it. Right, that's fine. But I was telling a buddy of mine, I'm like, you know who would be great on this Craig Berube Leafs team right now? Nazem Kadri.
Yep.
The catch is this. For the last few years, I was talking to Steve Dangle brings this up a lot. The question always ended up being, who is the best possible winger for John Tavares? Because they could never figure that line out. They tried with Marner, they tried with Willie, they've tried everything with John Tavares, and haven't been able to really find a good winger that meshes well with JT. Right? My answer is simple. When they traded for Ryan O'Reilly a couple of years ago, in the last major trade Dubas made before he was cut from the.
They ruined the Penguins, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Till he ruined the Penguins. Oh God, Jesus Christ. They had Ryan O'Reilly play center and had John Tavares on his wing, and that worked out great. And it answered the question that the only person good enough that could mesh well with John Tavares on his wing is John Tavares.
Yeah.
So then the idea would be you trade for Nas, which will never happen. They're never getting Nas back in Toronto. Ever.
No Shanahan there. Nope.
And you have Tavares play wing up for him.
I mean, I think you could either or, because they
have either or. Yeah, exactly. You could either or.
Together. They have the,
it could work.
They succeeded together in London, right? So
yeah, exactly. So,
and I think that's what they're trying to do with Domi right now. But that's a conversation that I'm sure we could have for hours.
That's a whole other topic for another time. That really is. But no, you know what? Leafs fans, just I guess to bring it back to that, like y'all need help.
I 100% agree, and I am a Leafs fan, but I am a non-traditional one. I like to say what two of my American friends, because a lot of people don't get hockey that I talk to, which is fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When I need to compare it to why I cheer for them, I go, well, they're the Dallas Cowboys of the NHL.
Yep. Yeah, but the difference is at least the Cowboys,
but they're the shittiest franchise.
At least the Cowboys won championships in the last 30 years.
Yeah,
that's kind of the only difference. But they really are the Cowboys of hockey. Really I don't want to harp on them, especially because I live here and I know a lot of people that are Leafs fans. But they got shut out by the Senators a couple nights ago.
Listen,
what are you doing?
I was at hockey when this happened with my youngest son, and I texted my wife because she was home with the littles, and I said, there's three certain things in life: death, taxes, and the Leafs losing to the Sens.
Yep.
It never fucking fails. That being said, Yusuf, this has been a great conversation.
This has been very fun, yeah.
I do want to do it again. Maybe we'll do it more in 2025. We can sit down and have a conversation again. We'll talk more hockey once the season ends, wrapping up a little bit.
Yep.
That being said, I want you to go ahead now, plug everything you need to plug, do shout outs that you need to do, and by all means,
okay.
Promote yourself.
I'm a freelance musician based out in Toronto. You can find me on Instagram at yus.rashid, which is my last name, Rashid. I think there's an underscore there too, so you can find me there on Insta. When I'm not doing music related things, I run I guess it's still music based, but I run a music reaction podcast called Airborne Sea Life, which you can find us on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok at Airborne Sea Life. And when I'm doing that, I do all the sports stuff. So I work with a small wrestling podcast called Vacant Wrestling, your Vacant Wrestling Podcast, VWP. We are on TikTok, on Spotify, on YouTube, and any other streaming platforms. You can find me there talking about all the ridiculous things going on, mainly in the WWE, but in wrestling in general. And then the last thing to plug is just my own thing that I do from time to time. It's a little channel I have called The Rashid Report. which is mainly me complaining about Detroit hockey and why the Red Wings are bad, or talking about how the Lions have been on a tear. And so, yeah, you can find me that's on YouTube. There's so many things I have to keep track of. But that's on YouTube at the Rashid Report, as well as my TikTok, which is just Yusuf.Rosh, YUSUF.ROSHD. There, it used to be mainly music stuff, but I pretty much only talk about sports on that TikTok account now. So you can find so you can find me there. But yeah, that's pretty much everything I think I have to plug.
You have anything coming up that you want to try to meet up with people that let me rephrase that. If after people watch this episode and they see you at a wrestling event or a hockey game, are you approachable or just stay away from you?
Dude, come say hi. Come say hi. You know what? Like, it's funny. I used to be a big part of the Red Wings Twitter fan base for a few years, especially during the pandemic. And this past, not even this past year, back in February when the All-Star game was here in Toronto, there were some other Red Wings fans, obviously. It's the fucking All-Star game, why not? So we're all chit-chatting. And I go, okay, so what's your name? He goes, oh, I'm yeah. And he goes, what's your name? I go, oh, I'm Yusuf. And he goes, oh, are you Yusuf Rashid you're Yusuf Rashid on Twitter, right? And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, he's like, oh, I'm this person. I go, holy shit. Just come say hi. Like, I don't look like the most approachable person in the world. But listen, this guy is one of the most loveliest people I've ever hung out with. I only hung out with him for a maximum 8 hours combined because we were watching wrestling, but definitely a welcoming presence. Very. No, like, if you check out my stuff, you want to come chit chat, come say hi. Like, I'm always down. I'm always looking for people to like talk to about these kinds of things, because it's difficult talking about sports and being emotionally enraged when you're doing it alone. I don't know how Steve Dangle does it. God bless his soul. But, just come say hi. Like, I've had that happen at wrestling shows now where, we'll do some things and I'll see some people and they'll be like, oh, hey, you're with it. Yeah, what's up, dude? Like, let's chit chat. Like, I'd love to get to a point where I'm able to talk to more fans just on the fly about that, So
I love that. That being said, ladies and gentlemen, Yusuf, I look forward to seeing you in a few months, if not sooner. I get very often, but I do plan to meet up with you when the event of Elimination Chamber comes to Toronto. Yep. I thank you generously for your time.
Dude, thank you for having me, man. This has been such a fun conversation.
It has been. I can't wait to do it again. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Shadow. This is Yusuf. Thank you for watching Spotlight with Shadow. We'll see you next time.